Where else would you rather be? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. Welcome to the people of Penn State. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State Network. The People of Penn State podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Go ahead and give us a review, subscribe, like, whatever you could do to help promote this podcast to other Penn Staters to help them find all the great stories that we share. And we have another one coming up for you today. Today we are joined by Dr. Ayla Stanford. She recently served as the Region 3 Director of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Stanford gained national recognition during the COVID-19 pandemic using the infrastructure of her pediatric surgery practice to create a grassroots organization to focus on testing, contact tracing, and vaccination in communities that are devoid of access to care and resources. Her focus on the most vulnerable populations disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 saved lives. Dr. Stanford is a practicing physician for over 25 years. She is the former director of the Center for Minority Health and Health Disparities at Temple University's School of Medicine. She's a member of the Philadelphia Board of Health, the Philadelphia Department of Health COVID-19 Advisory Board, and a trusted national leader and public health advocate. In addition to opening a center for health equality to improve health outcomes in communities with the lowest life expectancy, her organization was responsible for over 100,000 COVID-19 tests and vaccinations. Please welcome Penn Stater, Dr. Ayla Stanford, to the podcast. Ayla, how are you?
I am fantastic, Paul. How are you this morning or today?
I'm also doing fantastic. Let's start your story right at the very beginning and tell us, how did you become a Penn StateNittany Lion?
Well, I applied. I graduated from high school, and I had a cousin who was a physician, and he had gone to Penn State. And so I was following everything he did because that was my blueprint. And that was the closest I came to anyone who was a doctor. So that was how. Should I keep going? And I started at Penn State Barron in Erie, PA, because at the time I was 16, 17 years old, and I wanted to be as far away from my parents as possible. And so coming from Philadelphia, that's what Erie provided. So I picked it out on the map, and that's how I ended up there. Oh, what happened?
That's amazing. That was one of the questions I had for you. You're from Philadelphia. You literally had to drive past every other Commonwealth campus to get to Barron. And so beyond the distance, right? Why did Barron really turn out to be a good decision for you?
You know, everyone was talking about the main campus, right? Or State College or whichever. And I don't even think at the time Barron was a 4-year university, but it had all of the majors that I was interested in, and it had sports teams. And like I said, the distance was a big part for me, but that's what I saw when I sort of compared Barron to State College. It had most of the things I was interested in. For me, the biggest part was the small classroom size. Like, I don't think I was ready for 500 other students. Like, I was very much the person who sat in the front and at the end of class went up to the teacher to ask a question. And so for me, I thought that smaller classroom setting was best.
So as a student, what were you involved in? What activities outside of the classroom did you get active with?
Well, at Barron first, for my first 2 years, I was a Penn State Lion ambassador. So I did all the tours in Erie. I also helped found the first track club or track team at Penn State Barron because I was such a passionate runner, and I missed not being able to run every day. So I remember doing the charters with student affairs to get a Penn State team started there. When I moved to University Park, I pledged a sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I lived in East Halls in Bigler, and this year will be 33 years of sisterhood and service and scholarship. So I'm very proud of that. When I got to University Park, I applied to become a Lion ambassador again. So I did that. I was also part of a secret society, which I cannot mention, hence secret. And I was part of the Black Caucus. And finally, I worked at the Paul Robeson Cultural Center. That was my work study job. And I loved it because I could study while I was there. But that's where all the parties were and things and events. And Mr. Young was there, who was instrumental and just very much a mentor for many of us. And so that's what I was doing, activity wise.
That's amazing. As a Lion ambassador walking backwards into history, although I've been on the Erie campus, I can't imagine walking backwards up those hills.
Yes, very windy roads and hills. You're absolutely right.
And as much as I personally want to dive into the track club that you started, I'm a track and field fan. We moved here from Eugene, Oregon, where it's Tracktown, USA out there. We will stay focused on Penn State. So you mentioned that you had a family member that was sort of an inspiration for your career aspirations. So I'm assuming, from the very beginning, you wanted to pursue medicine and become a physician.
Absolutely. In fact, my 8th grade graduation yearbook next to my name says doctor. So, my girlfriend said, we all said doctor back then, Ayla, but I was pretty committed. And in Philadelphia, in the public school system, we didn't have as many resources as a lot of other schools in the more affluent communities. However, if you tested into the AG or the AT or MG classes, which were academically talented, mentally gifted, it meant one day a week you got a subway token and you got to go somewhere else and be exposed to a different curriculum and experience. And for me, that meant I left my neighborhood and got to go to this beautiful part of the city, which was University City in West Philadelphia. And that's really where my love of medicine began, because I could see something different. And so I've known since then, but Dr. Christoph DeBrady, I'll just put a shout out, another great Penn State alum. He's an anesthesiologist. He was the first one to expose me to being in an operating room. And 2 of his kids, one is another alum, have gone to Penn State as well. So I'll mention that.
That's amazing. Where along the way did you kind of hone the type of doctor you wanted to become?
Probably when I was at Penn State again, at College of Medicine in Hershey, when I was in medical school, and I was 21 years old, sitting in class, learning about health disparities and that people of color had poorer health outcomes and shorter life expectancies. And I felt helpless. But at the same time, I felt some hope, because I'm like, I'm going to be a doctor. And when I get there, I'm going to change all of that, And a lot of it, I think, came from just how I was treated at the doctor. I felt sometimes there was some bias, there were stereotypes or expectations of why my mom brought us when she did, or why she didn't bring us, or things like that. And I could, how you can just sort of feel an inspecting, critiquing eye. And even as a child, I remembered that. And when I got to medical school and I heard about some of the reasons why, I thought, I'm going to be a part of making lives better for folks in impoverished areas. And I would say my lived experience, but also being in medical school, really ignited that for me.
This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by Dr. Ayla Stanford. She is a public figure and surgeon. Dr. Stanford, walk us through your career. You graduated from Penn State. Walk us through your career right up until the start of the pandemic.
Oh, Fantastic question. I personally feel like I was living my best life. Okay. So
Right.
I had opened my own private practice, mainly because I have 3 children. And as a surgeon, you go to work before the sun comes up. You often come home after the sun goes down. So I wasn't seeing them. And one night, I left to go into the hospital to operate. And one of my sons said to me, "Mommy, are you going to be here when I wake up in the morning?" And I thought, I'm like missing my children. And the only way I could have control over my schedule is by having my own practice. I opened my own practice, but stayed on staff at all the hospitals where I had previously been employed. That gave me more control over my schedule. I also have a medical consulting service where even adults, because I'm board certified in pediatric and adult general surgery, could reach out to me about vetting the best doctor, or they were diagnosed with a new condition and they needed to know who to go to. So I was able to provide health consulting advice. That was also a business I started. And also a nonprofit called It Takes Philly, encouraging and empowering our children to aim high because, again, wanting to mentor the next generation. And so those were the 3 things that I was doing: being a wife, being a mom, and then COVID hit. And then everyone from my community from Philadelphia were calling with tons of questions and needing to know where to get services. So that's what I was doing: wife, mom, surgeon, volunteering,
Right.
doing mission trips to Haiti, just really just living my life.
And then 2020 comes around, right? The pandemic hits, and you, your husband, your pastor, really everyone in your community transforms your practice into a mobile testing unit, really a mobile healthcare unit in Philadelphia to serve underserved populations. Take us back to the origin of that idea, how you pulled it off at no cost to your patients.
So people were calling and saying, "Ayla, I think I have COVID. I went to the hospital and they wouldn't test me. I got to a testing location, and because I took the bus or the subway and I wasn't in the car, they wouldn't test me. Or they would test my child, but they wouldn't test me. Or my doctor wasn't on staff, so they wouldn't accept my prescription." And there were all these reasons. And I called the hospitals where I was on staff and said, "Are you really turning people away?" And they gave me all these sort of bureaucratic reasons as to why. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I said, "I'm a surgeon. I have masks. I have gloves. I have gowns. I have my own practice. I don't need to ask for permission. And I have an account with LabCorp that had the testing supplies." And I kept calling saying, "I need testing kits." And they said, "You're a surgeon. What does a surgeon do at the COVID test?" And I said, "I promise if you give them to me, I will use them." And then they said, "Well, how are you going to pay for it?" And I said, "You're going to bill me. I'm a physician in good standing. I've had an account with you for years." And after pleading a lot, they agreed. And initially, my husband was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I can't stand to see anyone lose their life or not know what to do because they can't get a $50 test. So I'll figure it out." And initially, we went door to door. And that took way too long. And then through my pastor, we thought about, okay, Black Americans are being impacted the most. We're going to go where they trust, and that is the Black church. And so he reached out to all the churches in the zip codes where the disease rates were the highest. And that's where we went. And we would basically build a triage hospital in the parking lot. And I said to the pastors, all I need is your electricity and your restrooms for our staff. And that's honestly how we got started. And because the people gave us the privilege to care for them, quite honestly, we earned their trust. Eventually, the CARES Act was passed by the Biden-Harris administration, and I was able to get reimbursed. But I can show you the $200,000 bills that I got until that happened. And I just was willing to take the chance, leveraging my business and my bank account and my skill set at no charge, as well as all of the people who volunteered to work alongside me, because the services were taking too long and 1 in 4 people had COVID and they were dying quickly. And we needed to, there was no vaccine back then. Remember, all you had was a test and contact tracing. Test so you could get early intervention, if you will, supportive care, and you could let other people know. So that's all we had. And they didn't even have that. And I knew I could do something about it. So we did.
It's, it's interesting as I look at your career pre-COVID and post-COVID. You talked about living your best life and being able to find that balance between your own practice and family and all of that. And yet, I introduce you as a public figure, right? Which is really what you've become post-COVID, and kind of the opportunities that have come your way because of this decision that you made and the risk that you took. How I don't know if it's how difficult of a decision was it to kind of jump in to the public figure and become a leader and serve on these health boards that you have served on. How much of a decision was that, or how much of did you feel like it was a calling to you that you were being called to do this for your community?
I definitely feel like it was a calling because there was no playbook. It's not like I was saying, okay, if I get this position in my profession, if I get this, it'll elevate me to that. There was none of that. I didn't have a plan. This was not what I expected to do. But as a surgeon, you identify a disease, you find the etiology, and you treat it. You're not treating the symptoms, you're treating the cause. And for me, it was an absence of resources. It was a healthcare system that has been largely untrustworthy to people of color. And in a public health emergency, you go to the most vulnerable. And those are things that I've learned in my training that I went to. The public speaking, honestly, being a Lion ambassador, people can laugh. They saw us walking backwards. Oh, those nerds, those whatever. I'm telling you, when you're speaking to VIPs on a regular basis and or people just coming to get to know the campus, you get very comfortable with that. Also, just as a surgeon and as a pediatric surgeon, you have to speak to parents all day after you operate on their children. And so all of those things prepared me to be in front of the camera. And I never had a publicist. We did not reach out to the media. They found us. I think in the midst of COVID, we were a feel-good story in a lot of ways, even though it was really born out of tragedy and in some ways out of injustice, if you will. But we were action oriented and we were doing the work. We were talking about it, but we were doing something about it. And I never called CNN. I didn't call MSNBC. I didn't call, Good Morning America. They found us. And one of my mentors used to say, Eli, keep your head down, do the work, and a job will come to you. Opportunities will come. And that is largely what happened during COVID.
Yeah, good recognizes good, right? And when people are doing good, people want to tell that story. And so no surprise that you've got the publicity that you have been able to get organically through the work that you've done. So much so, you've become an icon in the medical community, and this led to an opportunity to meet another iconic Philly native. You had a chance meeting with Will Smith. How did that meeting come about, and how did it turn into a relationship that now supports the work you're doing?
So, great question. My goodness. It was now over 10 years ago, but someone said to me, could you take care of a VIP patient? I'm like, well, all my patients are VIP. What does that mean? But he was doing a movie in a remote location and just needed a physical from head to toe. I was like, sure, I can put him in touch with the best doctor and yada, yada, and go over the results with him. And that's what happened. But then someone on his team got sick and they were in Philly and he reached out to me. And then a family member was ill and he reached out to me. And it was initially these one-offs, but then there was a certain relationship just because we are around the same age. We're from the same place. And there were certain cultural isms that people from Philly have that we just clicked. And it exposed it exposed me to so many things. I mean, for example, I had to build a triage hospital for him in the middle of the desert in the Grand Canyon when he hella bungee jumped out of a helicopter for his 50th birthday. And as a surgeon, we do ATLS, advanced trauma life support. And so I was poised and ready to do that and build a team. And it grew. It grew during COVID. I was the one responsible for doing all of his COVID screening when he did his book tour for his book. And he went to, let's see, Philly, New York, Brooklyn, Chicago, LA, and London. And I was a part of all 5 of those. We tested everyone for COVID. Not one person on his immediate team had COVID. We tested every guest. And it was a great success. I'm very, very proud of that. And so, again, organic, just trust, synergy, and yeah. So that has also been a great eye opener, and honestly helped me when this came about with COVID, because I had to practice medicine with him in different remote areas. So when I said we're going to build a hospital in the parking lot, people are like, what are you talking about? But little did I know that my mission work in Haiti had prepared me for that. And working with Will in literally the desert had prepared me for that. So I knew what was possible.
That's amazing. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the disparities in healthcare. You know the stats, right? African Americans make up about 14% of the U.S. population, and yet only about less than 5% of the nation's practicing physicians are African American. What are the impacts of this disparity?
So the impacts, Paul, of the disparity, we know from the Institutes of Medicine and lots of reports from our Secretaries of Health of the United States that people of color have better health outcomes when they're cared for by people who look like them, who have a similar cultural experience, if you will. There are certain just nuances and nonverbal communication that people just get. And that leads to better health outcomes. In fact, there was just a paper that came out that said, even if you have a Black person on staff, even if that person does not directly care for a Black patient, that those health outcomes are better because that individual staff member can help educate the group. You mentioned the statistics, 5% of docs, 14% of the population. There's not enough time. I don't know, in my lifetime, I would like to see that it be matched, 14% docs, 14% of the population. So what we have to do is educate our colleagues, our health providers, that we have to collectively have cultural humility, that we have to understand and allow our patients to teach us what they need. And that means admitting that we don't know everything, and that the best person to instruct us is the patient sitting across from us. Also, just some of the systemic and institutionalized things that exist with the standardized exams to get into medical school have already been shown to be biased and not reflect the sort of upbringing of most of Black American children. So it's kind of hard to take a test that talks about par when you've never played golf and you're expected to get that question correct.
Right.
The other thing in our medical schools is teaching the students about how how patients of color present differently. You know, someone who's bleeding or has hemorrhage, whose hue is my complexion, I'm not going to be pale, right? But someone who's white may be pale, and just teaching them different ways, because unfortunately, those images have not made their way into our textbooks yet. And we have to recognize for those outcomes to improve that it takes all of us working on that. And I could talk about this for hours. So if you ask me again, I could give you another response. But it's really something that we collectively, as educators, as providers, and the patients, we all have to learn how to advocate better and teach better.
So I think I have this right, but you were the first female surgeon trained completely in the United States, female pediatric surgeon, completely trained in the United States. So what advice do you give to young women that aspire to be the next Ayla Stanford?
Oh my gosh. First, that's very, very kind. It even sounds weird, the next Ayla Stanford. I would say that there will be people who think you don't belong or that you don't have what it takes. You have to have a really good understanding of you and your skill set, what you know, but more importantly, what you don't know. And the things that you don't know, work on increasing your aptitude in those areas. Stay focused on, identify what your goal is, and then stay focused on that. If you're passionate about it, it won't feel like work. I know people say that all the time, but it really won't. You'll want to get up and do it every day. You'll be excited about doing it every day. And I expect you to outdo me.
Right.
Because you have so many more resources. I think, honestly, the world is more open now than it was once upon a time, when I was at Penn State. And it's like, it's your season. It's your time to shine. This is, life. This isn't a dress rehearsal. Don't have regrets. Take calculated risks, and be your best you. Because I am enjoying it, my life, and who knew this would come from giving to others. So,
well, that is fantastic advice. This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined today by Dr. Ayla Stanford. She is a public figure and surgeon. So, Dr. Stanford, we like to have fun at the end of every People of Penn State podcast. So we call it our lightning round. So I'm going to throw some quick hitter questions at you, and you just talk about the first thing that pops to mind.
Okay.
So first is your favorite class at Penn State.
Oh, I know this is going to be bad, but my African dance class, I'm telling you, I enjoyed it. I wasn't the best dancer. I don't even think I got an A. I might have got a B minus, but it was fun. The beats were good, and probably I was too busy dancing to really learn the steps that they were trying to teach me, but that was my favorite.
The dance is so subjective. How can you give a grade?
I agree, but there are, sort of key technical skills that I was clearly not mastering. So I stick to science. You said my most fun. That was by far the most fun.
That's awesome. You mentioned you were a Lion ambassador. What was your fun fact at the end of the tour?
Oh my gosh. You're taking me way back, and I don't even, my fun Penn State fact?
Yeah. I know at the end of tours, at least today, at the end of tours, they share their point of pride or their fun fact.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of them, but I would say, like, I saw the old stadium go down and the new stadium go up, right? Oh, wow. Beaver. Yeah. I mean, that's how long I've been around. I think walking down the hill from Bigler and watching people literally jump off of those platform dives in the swimming pool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how about if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to put it out there. Who knows? It could happen. But I think Oprah.
Oh, I think that could definitely happen.
I mean, I was in her documentary, so
Okay.
I do know that she at least knows of me and knows of my work for The Color of Care that was on Smithsonian. But she has done so much. Like, I would just like to be able to talk to her about what I've done. I'd want her to like look at me as a whole person and say, here's your strength. I would explore this, and this is how I would do it. Like, I'd love her to strategize. I personally would want health equity to be one of her favorite things. You know, when she sort of blesses something or invests in it, it takes off. And so that's who I would want to sit down and talk to.
It's funny how the world looks at Oprah now, right? At the core of it, she's a journalist, right? I mean, and then she has emerged into this, this just iconic powerhouse of a media mogul. But people look at her like an oracle, right? When you say, look at me and tell me what my strength is, Oprah. I think that's funny. No, I think you all, I hope that happens for you. That would be a great dinner. Where would it be? Where if she came to Philadelphia, I know she's from Chicago, but if she came to Philadelphia, where would you take her?
I would take her to a place called South, a jazz kitchen on Broad Street, owned by the Bynum brothers. It's like one of my favorite places. I feel like I'm sitting in my living room. The drinks are good. The food is good. The dessert is phenomenal. They often have great jazz bands, and they're adjacent to the restaurant. They have a catering side. I love South all day. I know exactly where I would take her. Yes.
There we go. That's great bonus content. How about your favorite Penn State sport?
You know, of course, I mean, football, but track and field. Track and field. I was just at the Penn Relays last weekend, and I was like, we are. And someone behind me was like, Penn State, And the women, I want to say, did they win the 4x8 or the 4x4?
They won the 4x8 in Penn State. It was a Penn State record time. They did it in like 8 minutes and 30 seconds,
I saw that with my own eyes. Yes, I did. I was going crazy with the We Are Penn State. So track and field for sure, because that's my love. And then just Penn State. I mean, I have so many memories of card block, so many memories of like the drum major at the games, John Baton. Like I had a great time.
And your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
So I got a couple, but Black Cow with the vanilla and the root beer, and also salted caramel cheesecake, because I shouldn't love the salt, but I do with the caramel, and I love cheesecake. And then of course, like black cherry, or it's cherry twist or something. I love those too.
That's amazing. I did not know Black Cow existed. I'm a root beer fan myself. So
it's good. Yeah.
I can't wait for that to come back.
For sure.
Now, I moved this one to the end because I think you have some video footage that you'd like to show us, but your most unusual We Are moment, kind of where you said we are to somebody or someone shouted it to you and it was unexpected.
Right. So I'm at the Bad Boy movie premiere, with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. This was right before COVID, January 2020. And my husband, who went to historically Black college and university, Dell State, and he's always making fun. You guys talk about Penn State wherever. And we see Keegan-Michael Key. He's at the premiere, right? And I'm like, hey, I see him. I'm like, hey, we are, Penn State. We're saying it back and forth to each other. And I say to my husband, oh, can you take a video of us, right? So my husband holds it up, the phone, to do the video, and he says, we are. I'm like, dude, you're not a Penn Stater. You don't say we are. And so he says we are, and Keegan-Michael Key says Penn State. I'm like, no. You messed us up. We say it. We are Penn State, And so I think the video just shows my husband saying it first, and he messed up our cues, and then we did it again after.
That's great. I think we have that clip.
Penn State. Oh no, see now you.
Okay, wait. Okay, are we gonna say it together?
Here we go.
Okay, we are
Penn State.
That's my girl.
Okay.
We are.
That's amazing.
Penn State. Oh no.
That is amazing. Well, Dr. Stanford, thank you so much for joining us on the People of Penn State podcast. It's alumni like you who allow us to share your story that elevates the value of all Penn State degrees and continues to swell thy fame of dear old state. And for that, we're truly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, whenever we were at the game for homecoming and I was for the glory of old state, for the futures that we were, people are like, you know the words? I'm like, absolutely. Thou didst mold us, dear old state, dear old state. I am like the true, I bleed blue and white. I'm undergrad, Penn State. I was, you know, branch campus, if you will, Penn State. Right. I'm medical school, Penn State. And I am like forever, I'm lifetime member, Penn State alumni. And I'm hoping one of my 3 kids, I'm like, come on, one of you guys have got to go to Penn State. But I'm grateful for all that Penn State has given to me. And so thank you. I enjoyed this.
And I want to thank our producer, Vincent Longaro. Vincent, thank you for all you do behind the scenes. And thank you to all who tune in to the People of Penn State podcast. If you like this episode, I hope that you'll subscribe to the People of Penn State podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice. And while you're there, go ahead and give us a rating, drop us a review, help us spread the word and share the podcast with your friends and fellow Penn Staters. If you're a member of the Alumni Association, thank you for your support. If not, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thank you for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are